Namaste. Welcome to Urban Chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I'm joined by Abhijit Iyer-Mitra to discuss the defense deal between India and Russia about S-400. So Abhijit, welcome to the show.
Well.
Abhijit, first tell us what exactly is this S-400? What purpose does it serve? And why is India going for it?
Okay. So the S-400 is advertised as an anti-ballistic missile system. It is not. When you go talk to the Russians in private, they will tell you it is not. They will say it is very, very, very good against aircraft. But given the state of their electronics, because see, they have the kinetics to intercept ballistic missiles. They do not, however, have the electronics to intercept it. So think of intercepting a ballistic missile, which is re-entering the atmosphere at 17 to 24 times the speed of sound. It's like shooting a bullet with a bullet. It's almost the exact same in terms of distance. It's kind of the same kind of analogy that would apply. Now, one part of it is you need to have the kinetics that, the bullet will also travel just as fast and intercept it at a safe enough distance. That the Russians say they can do. The problem is the electronics in detecting it, pinpointing it, because when it's coming in, remember, it is the last few seconds that matter. You detecting it in absolutely cold space is almost impossible to do. Right, because the engine stops at that point. It's not powered throughout. Once it's gone into atmospheric orbit, it's then powered by its own this thing. The warheads then separate, and they are very curiously, because they are conically shaped. They are automatic. They're stealthy. They're tiny and they're stealthy. They'll be the size of, if you look at the bookcase behind you, a 150 kiloton warhead is that space between your two shelves on which you've kept your speaker and the statue of Sardar Patel. So what happens is that small an object flying at 15 to 24 times the speed of sound. You can't detect it while it is, it's almost impossible to detect it while it is up in space. You detect it from watching the launch trail, because that is because it's a rocket launch, it has a huge signature. You detect it from there on, you have to predict it, or you need extremely sophisticated electronics to be able to detect it out in space. When the real detection starts is when it re-enters atmosphere. Now, there becomes a problem, because on one hand, you can visually see it because it creates that plasma shield around it in that sense. The problem with the plasma shield is it also makes it impossible for radars to detect it, because plasma is stealth. It is the most perfect stealth, because you can't detect things through a plasma shield like that. So the re-entry plasma, once re-entry is completed, you then only have 3 seconds to intercept it, 3 seconds or less. Right? So this is the difficulty of intercepting a missile. It's also, the kind of range arcs. If I fire from here, I can literally cover this entire circle, which means if this is your border, I have to detect across every point in the border. And the kind of detection you require for this kind of stealth, you can't have those radars that keep detecting, say, this arc, this arc, this arc. It has to be point focused, very high power and things like that. It's a nightmare. It's not a quantity solution. It is an extremely high quality solution that has to be deployed in extremely large quantity. So what happens is, this is the role the S-400 is meant to do, but it does not do it. What it does is it intercepts planes very well out at very long ranges, about 400 kilometers or so. To be safe, say about 300 kilometers, because it'll have to maneuver and there'll be a significant loss of kinetic energy during the maneuver phase and things like that. It is also part of a multi-level system. By itself, it is not great. It is great when it is used as part of lots of systems of systems. So in the shortest range, you have your shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile, the IGLA. Then you have the Tunguska type missiles, which is both gun and missile. That so the shoulder-fired one goes to about 5 to 7 kilometers. The gun plus missile thing, it's a tiny missile that's on a tank, or you can mount it on a truck as well. Goes to about 15 kilometers. Then you have the Thor, the SA-15, which goes to about 20, 25 kilometers at most, or it may be 10 and 15. I forget the exact figures now, but we're talking about almost 5-kilometer increases in range. Then you have the SA-11, the Gadfly, which would, it's called the Buk in Russia, which goes up to about 35 kilometers. The Buk is the one that brought down that Malaysian airline plane in Ukraine. Then you have the first variant of the S-400, which is about 100 kilometers or so. And then you have the long range variant. So see, you have to pass all these tiers. That's why, an enemy plane, when it is flying through, it doesn't know what's going to shoot. If I fly too high, they'll use the S-400 to shoot me down. If I fly slightly lower than that, they'll use the SA-11 to shoot me down. If I fly slightly lower than that, they'll use the SA-15 to shoot me down. If I fly lower than that, they'll use the SA-11. I forget now what the Tunguska's missile is. They'll use that to shoot me down. And if I fly even lower than that, then they'll use the shoulder-fired missiles to shoot me down. So there's this layering. And this layering happens because Russian electronics are not that good. In America or Israel, you'll maybe have 2, maximum 3 layers. Here, they have to have 5 to 7 layers. Right? Now, in the Indian context, buying it, we claim we're buying it to protect the national capital against missiles and things like that. As we've established, protecting against missiles is black magic. It's voodoo. You can't realistically do it. America has expended a huge amount of money on it. And even they have to keep doctoring tests, doing, the kind of lying that you mostly associate with DRDO and things like that in order to pretend that it can accurately intercept a missile in war circumstances. See, in a test, you can intercept anything. You know where the missile is being launched, you know where the missile is coming, you know at what time to fire it, and that's that. Whereas in a war, it can come from any time, any place, anywhere. There will be lots of other missiles being fired and explosions happening. So how are you going to detect that this is a missile, etc., etc.? So it's very complex. Now, the problem in India is, number one, we've bought it under false pretenses. Number two, we don't have that system of systems. Now, you look at Armenia, they couldn't, you've seen subsonic Israeli and Turkish drones, subsonic, flying at less than the speed of sound, taking out S-300 batteries. S-300 is the predecessor of the S-400, almost the same missile and same system. Why? Because they didn't know that this drone was coming. They didn't have this multi-layered system. So you can detect fighters coming from a very high altitude, but a drone that is flying just at about 400-500 feet over sea level, you can't detect it. You can't shoot it down, so it comes and knocks off your missile system. So there are things like that. But where the S-400 is extremely good is at intercepting planes at long range as part of a system of systems. The Americans also are very worried about it. It may be helpful in terms of simulation against the Rafale. So if you keep using your Rafales against your own S-400, you will know exactly what the S-400 sees and you develop counter strategies to it, which means you defeat the Chinese S-400s. So that's one important point. It's a good thing that we have that. Now, the issue is the Russians never share source codes with the Israelis and the Israelis never share source codes with the Russians. Primary competitors. You give source codes to Russia, then everybody from Turkey to Iraq to Iran will have systems that can destroy your systems. So, it's like giving up the crown jewels. They will never do that. So what ends up happening is when your second tier is an Israeli system called the Spider, the Spider on land, or it's the Barak LR and MR on
Tell
sea.
something about Spider and the Barak as well, because
So Spider would be something like the 100-kilometer range variant of the S-400. The much smaller missile, but it's much, much smaller than even the 100-kilometer variant of this thing. That would be the Barak, sorry. And it would go out about 120 kilometers against aircraft. The Spider would go out to about 25 to 40 kilometers. So it's kind of in the same category as the Book. That's the SA-11 that shot down the Malaysian airliner. But each missile is much, much, much smaller than the equivalent Russian missile. So there is a tiering. The problem is, how are you going to get the top tier to talk to the lower tier?
That's always a problem, the system integration.
That is always a problem.
But then why is India buying? You were saying one reason is that you can then do a test run, simulation run, so that you know what Chinese are capable of. But will it have any strategic benefit against Pakistan?
It will actually have significance. It depends on tactics. Remember, even the best weapons can be defeated with very good tactics. But if you use it properly, you can pretty much start shooting down Pakistani missiles, Pakistani aircraft. It could take off from Sargodha Air Base in Pakistan, and you could shoot it out before it's even fully airborne. Technically, if you deploy it right near the border, if you've protected yourself against drones, don't repeat the same mistakes the Armenians did, or the Israelis did, or the Egyptians did in the 70 war. I mean, they all made mistakes, different kinds of mistakes. So that would be one. The second one would be, say, deploying it in Leh or Ladakh. You can ward off a lot of Chinese fighters. There is, of course, the advantage that your Rafale and all your fighters will know what they are up against. And then there are the not so smart reasons, which is, humko yahi missile chahiye. They sometimes they do actually act like kids. It's like a kid going into a Toys R Us store saying, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that. The anti-ballistic reasons given are complete codswallop. I think anybody who's done a proper evaluation of the S-400 can tell you it's not a very good anti-ballistic missile system. And by the way, I'm quoting Russians. I'm not quoting any foreigners on this. This is all the discussions I've had in Russia, because as a rule with Russian weapons, I prefer to talk to Russians, because, Russian weapons that Russia uses and Russian weapons they sell to other countries are very different. They sell monkey weapons to other countries. They use the best for themselves. So it's a lot of things combined, a lot of good reasons, a lot of bad reasons. Unfortunately, the official explanations all comprise the bad reasons.
So why did India go for it? Why was the deal delayed? And do you think we'll get it by the end of this year, as being reported in the news?
Get it by the end of this year. Why we went for it is a bit of a complex issue. Once we were flirting with the Israeli Arrow system for a while, which is actually an anti-ballistic missile system, but it is only anti-ballistic missile. You can't really use it against maneuvering fighter aircraft, because see, a fighter aircraft, once it sees the missile coming, it will go like this. You can't really intercept it with this particular missile. The Arrow would intercept on a predetermined course. So it can do some maneuver, but not too much of a maneuver. We tried that. Apparently, there were some issues with the Indian story is there were issues with America approving the sale. The Israeli story was that the Israeli and the American story was, boss, we said, go for it. We'll sell it to you, but you will not integrate it with any Russian system. Right? So that was the thing. We bought the radar for it, the Green Pine radar of the Arrow system we bought. It is the basis of our anti-ballistic missile radars. It is also the mother of the swordfish radar, which is India's own anti-ballistic missile radar, which is essentially a derivative of the green pine. It looks out much further and things like that. Supposedly, we don't know because I'm yet to see a proper image of it or read up. I mean, there's no real public literature on the swordfish radar system so far. So that is what why we gave up on a Western system, and this one was the available system on the market, and we bought it, except it doesn't do what we want of it, which is ballistic missile interception. We have our own domestic ballistic missile, anti-ballistic missile program that's called the endospheric interceptor and the exospheric interceptor. So the endospheric is, those last 3 seconds after it has gone through the plasma, this thing. And the exo-atmospheric is outside of that. You have to fire 2 missiles in order to intercept it, which is actually, it solves a lot of the problems that we were talking about in the first part of this program of, whatever. But firing 2 missiles for every incoming missile, you understand, is not a very feasible solution, economically speaking, especially given that these missiles are going to be very, very expensive. Number one. Number two is the fact that Russia, they were owed a big deal. Our relationship with Russia, unfortunately, is unidimensional. It's entirely defense-based because it could have also been based on energy and commodities. The problem with energy is their location is so far away, the cost of transport is quite big, which is why we're discussing a swap with Japan, that we take over Japanese oil concessions in Qatar and Bahrain, and they take over our Sakhalin project. It's one of the discussions because Sakhalin to Japan is across the sea. Qatar or Bahrain to Bombay is across the sea. We exchange. As in, Sakhalin sells to Japan and Japanese in this thing sell directly. And we do it as, instead of doing it on a price-based thing, we do it as a barrels per unit or whatever based thing. So wo nahi hai. You don't have an advanced industrial ecosystem. So commodities like, say, molybdenum and things like that, you're not really going to use in this country. So there's not even that. What is left? Defense. And you have to buy from Russia. Otherwise, they'll sell to China and to Pakistan. So it's also a part extortion.
Yeah. So, but America is not happy about it, and China is also not happy about it. So what are their viewpoints and what they are thinking? Will America impose some sanctions on India for it?
Let's talk about China first. China is not happy about it because first they realize that it will give a lot of Indian pilots and Air Force units the knowledge to evade their S-400 systems. They also know that the S-400s that will be sold to India will be a significant higher quality than the S-400s sold to China, because China and Russia share a border, and Russia doesn't like that because most of Russia's nuclear units are actually deployed against China on the Chinese side of the border, which is something nobody wants to talk about, but that is the way it is. The second part of it is America. And America isn't happy about it because, again, you have a lot of sensitive American systems in your arsenal, which for the S-400 to work properly will have to be integrated with the S-400. But they are not going to impose sanctions for one very important reason, that if they impose sanctions, they realize that they're setting the relationship back by 30 years. To 1990, when we were under sanctions, or to 1998, when we came against more nuclear sanctions, they don't want to go back to those 20, 30 years. So they are doing they're moving heaven and earth. Sorry, the Pentagon is moving heaven and earth to see to it that sanctions are not imposed. The PMO and the Defense Ministry are moving heaven and earth to see to it that sanctions are imposed. Because they're not giving all the technical arguments that the Pentagon can use. They're giving all the rhetorical arguments, which are completely useless in this case. We are a sovereign country. How can you interfere in our sovereignty? You don't tell us what to do. You can just admit you don't have the capacity to integrate the S-400 with American systems. To integrate things, you first need to know how to build them. You don't know how to build them. How the hell are you going to integrate them? Right? It's like a horse cart builder teaching a BMW mechanic how to do his job. And you'll find a lot of videos on this thing. Abhijit Iyer-Mitra ne bola they can't communicate with each other. Jhuta, makkar, ganda, whatever. And they'll go off on. They make such funny videos. I actually watch it and go. I mean, you guys are seriously illiterate, aren't you? But anyway, it is what it is. So,
but babus will never accept they can't do something.
Exactly, that is the point. We're picking up the price tabs for the babu's incompetence and national pride in admitting that we can't do certain things. So the Pentagon is focusing on technical analysis, whereas the babus here are focusing on how to hide their own incompetence from their political masters. And they're giving the worst possible arguments, which is basically almost like trying to tell the Americans, you're not giving them a reason. You're just saying, jo karna hai kar le, bas. That isn't diplomacy, So
basically, karke dekh le.
Karke dekh le.
That's crazy, but this is how it is. But let's say we are buying again from Russia, and then in our geostrategic alliances, we're moving towards Quad. So we want to pivot towards the West, but we're still dependent on the Russian weaponry. How does that play out in the longer run?
It doesn't.
This is not sustainable.
It doesn't. You have a deeply, deeply dysfunctional system. So, for example, if you have an Apple ecosystem at home, I'm simplifying this a lot. Remember, building computers is a lot easier than building missiles or the kind of military integration. So, for example, even today in civil aviation, the kind of radars they use are considered obsolete in military aviation. Right. So this thing where an air traffic controller needs to tell you, please come down to 5,000 feet and maintain this circle. This would never happen in military aviation. Military aviation, first of all, the plane itself will chart its own course in relation to everything else, and it will know how to land it and everything. Modern fighter planes. Right. So civil aviation air traffic control and flight radars on modern aircraft are where military technology was in the 70s. Literally. There's like a 40-50 year gap because the technology is so sensitive. Right? So there's a whole set of issues there involved with this, which it's not a lack of self-realization. It's a lack of. Sorry, did that answer your question? Ask me the question again.
The question was that India is pivoting towards the Quad, towards the West, and then buying Russian weaponry. How does that play out? Is that
right? So Russian weaponry. It's the dynamics. The disruptive nature of Russian weaponry. It stops sometime before the collapse of the Soviet Union. And a lot of what they do is completely ossified in the 1990s. They haven't progressed beyond that, right? Which is very, very problematic. The West has progressed beyond it. How do you reconcile these two kinds of weapon systems in your own ecosystem? Like I said, Apple ka pura ecosystem hai. Your watch syncs with your iPhone, which syncs with your iMac, which syncs with your MacBook Pro, which syncs with your earphones. Literally, when you put on Mac earphones, it knows you've put them on and it automatically transfers it from this to that. it saves a lot of time. Whereas if you have a Windows plus Android plus Apple ecosystem, you're only going to be able to sync 2 or 3 things. Maximum you can sync, say, Microsoft Word and your phone numbers. What else can you sync between these 3 platforms? Nothing. So it's like that. And this is actually a lot worse, because here the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. If say the S-400 goes off, there's no guarantee the Israeli spider won't think that this is actually an enemy missile and try to intercept it.
Yeah.
So you'll have to turn off the spider. Remember, this is what was happening. You remember that helicopter that got shot down in
Balakot standoff.
During the Balakot standoff? It's because it couldn't communicate and things, they turned off their systems. The dangers of this are immense. And in modern war is so fast, you can't do this thing ki main computer shut down karunga and then do something and then computer. By the time you switch on your computer again, you've already been bombed. And the problem is the amount of public disinformation about this. I wish they put half the brains into solving the interoperability problem than they do in producing YouTube videos dissing anybody talking about the interoperability problem.
Your favorite boy of them, Abhijit. But thanks a lot for giving us update about S-400. But final question, will we actually get it by the end of this year? Because Russians are also as notorious as Indians when it comes to delivery of the actual product.
No. We'll probably get it by this year. Russians are notorious with lots of other people. They're always quite straightforward with us.
Oh, that's good.
Well, they have been for a few 10, 15 years now, more or less.
Okay.
If it gets delayed, it's usually there's some problem. There's actually a genuine problem.
But say if we were supposed to buy an alternative to S-400 in the future, an alternative to S-400, what would be that system?
Look, you could buy, say, the Arrow or the THAAD or something like that. THAAD is Theater High Altitude Air Defense, the American thing. Or it's called Aegis on Land, which is the American sea-based SM-3 missile, but it's optimized for land launch. The problem is you will still have a lot of the same problems. So the American systems and the Israeli systems will sync, or the European Aster system, they will sync perfectly with your Israeli second-tier defense. But what do you do with the Russian lower-tier defense after that? Right. So there's all kinds of issues involved out there. We're not saying just buy American. You can buy Israeli, you can buy European, but you have to buy from one philosophy where everything works together.
One ecosystem, basically.
One ecosystem.
That's interesting. I think.
Or go in for a completely Russian thing. In which case, go in for the Igla, the Tungushka, the Tor, the book, and finally the S-400. Basically, but you don't have the money for that.
Basically, don't mix the weapons of different ecosystems.
Never mix and match.
That's a very straightforward point, Abhijit. But thanks a lot for this update, and thanks a lot, audience, for listening to us. Abhijit brings one of the best commentary on these systems because he's also the one who is being trolled on the YouTube these days for his views on the defense technology and the military philosophy of India. But that's fine. This is how we have debate in the country. We have different viewpoints, and let's say something always good comes out of this kind of discussion. But thank you, Abhijit.
Well.